Come closer, my dears. If you're here with me tonight, leave a like, subscribe, and share this tale with someone you care about. I'd also love to know where you are watching from and what time is it there. My name is Margaret, and I am 91 years old now. I have lived alone for the past 12 years, ever since my husband, Frank, passed away. People often ask me whether I feel lonely, whether I'm afraid. The truth is, I learned a very long time ago that there is a vast difference between being alone and being in danger. Sometimes the most frightening moments happen when you believe you are safe inside your own home. Tonight, I will tell you about 3 nights I spent alone at home. 3 nights that still make my skin crawl. 3 nights that taught me the walls we build around ourselves don't always keep the monsters outside. These stories are real. Every word happened exactly as I'm about to tell it. If you're ready, make yourself a warm drink, lean back in your chair, and let yourself drift into the stories. The first incident happened in the summer of 1971. I was 38 years old, married to Frank for 15 years, and we had just moved into a small farmhouse in Pennsylvania. It was our first real home. Not a rental, not an apartment. It was ours. Buying your own home is a wonderful feeling. There's no troublesome landlord who can throw you out. Frank was a traveling sales representative for an automotive parts company, and that week he was on the road visiting clients in Ohio and Indiana. He would be gone for 5 days. Our 2 children, Linda and Beth, were staying with Frank's mother that week. She had offered to take them to the beach, and I supported the idea. The girls were 10 and 17 years old, perfect ages for building sandcastles and collecting seashells. For the first time in years, the house belonged entirely to me. The first 2 days were wonderful. I cleaned at my own pace, cooked simple meals just for myself, stayed up late reading books. No one asked for water or complained about nightmares. By Wednesday evening, I had begun to enjoy the solitude. I truly needed this kind of rest. That's when the phone calls began. The first call came at 6:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was watching the evening news, and the anchor had just announced the time and temperature. The phone rang, a loud, jarring sound in the quiet house. I walked toward the kitchen wall, where our avocado green rotary phone hung, and lifted the receiver. Hello? Silence. Not complete silence. Breathing. Soft, steady breathing. Hello, I said again, louder this time. Is anyone there? The breathing continued for a few more seconds. Then click. They hung up. I stood there holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone. A wrong number, I told myself. Someone dialed the wrong number and felt embarrassed. It happens. I hung up the phone and went back to the living room. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time I answered more cautiously. Hello? The same breathing. In and out, slow and deliberate, like whoever it was wanted me to hear it. "Who is this?" I demanded. My voice sounded braver than I felt. Then a voice, low and rough, almost a whisper. "I know you're alone." My stomach dropped. "What? Who?" Click. Dial tone. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my hand shaking as I hung up the phone. How did they know I was alone? Was it just a guess? A lucky shot from some teenage prankster? But the voice hadn't sounded young. It sounded adult, male, certain. I locked the front door and checked the back door. Both secure. I closed all the curtains in the living room and kitchen, suddenly feeling exposed by the windows. The phone hung on the wall like a threat, silent but menacing. I thought about calling Frank at his hotel, but I didn't have the number. He was supposed to call me tomorrow night. I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? Someone called and breathed at me? They'd think I was hysterical. At 8:15 p.m., the phone rang again. I stared at it, counting the rings. 4, 5, 6. I picked it up, but didn't say anything. "Margaret?" The voice said my name. "I can see your house, Margaret. The yellow one with the black shutters? Very nice. Would you have hung up or stayed on the line to learn more? Tell me in the comments." My blood turned to ice. He knew my name. He knew what my house looked like. This wasn't random. "What do you want?" I managed to say. "I want you to know I'm watching. I've been watching for days. I know your husband is gone. I know your children are gone. And I know you're in there all alone, probably standing in your kitchen right now, wearing that blue dress." I looked down. I was wearing a blue dress. I spun around, looking at the windows, but the curtains were all closed now. When had he seen me? Earlier today? Yesterday? "Leave me alone," I said, trying to sound firm. "I'm calling the police." He laughed, a soft, chilling sound. "Go ahead. By the time they get there, I'll be gone. But I'll call back, Margaret. I'll always call back." Click. I slammed the phone down and ran to every window in the house, making sure the curtains were fully closed, that no gaps showed through. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely work the fabric. I turned off all the lights in the front rooms and left only the kitchen light on so I could see. Then I did call the police. A bored-sounding dispatcher took my information. She said she'd send a patrol car to drive by. But unless someone was actively breaking in, there wasn't much they could do about phone calls. She suggested I take the phone off the hook for the night. I did. The moment I hung up with the dispatcher, I took our phone off the hook and set the receiver on the counter. The dial tone droned for a minute, then turned into that awful off-hook warning sound, that rapid beeping that seems to say, "Danger, danger, danger." Eventually, even that stopped, and there was just silence. I sat at the kitchen table with every door locked, every curtain closed, every light off except the one above my head. I'd grabbed Frank's baseball bat from the hall closet and kept it across my lap. The house was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. Around 10 p.m., I heard a car engine outside, slow crawling past the house. I crept to the living room window and peeked through a tiny gap in the curtains. A dark sedan was moving down the street at walking pace, no headlights on. It stopped directly in front of my house. I held my breath. The car idled there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 minutes. Then it rolled forward slowly and disappeared around the corner. I couldn't see the license plate or make out any details in the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen until dawn, bat in hand, jumping at every small sound. The house settled and creaked around me. The refrigerator hummed. A tree branch scraped against the siding. Every noise sounded like footsteps, like someone trying the doors, like breathing just outside the windows. When the sun finally came up, I felt brave enough to put the phone back on the hook. Immediately, it rang. I nearly screamed. After 4 rings, I picked it up. Margaret, the same voice. Did you sleep well? I slammed it down without responding. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to sit down. At 9 a.m., I called Frank's company and somehow got transferred to his hotel. When I heard his voice, I started crying. I told him everything. He wanted to come home immediately, but I told him no. I'd call a friend to stay with me. He made me promise to call the police again. I did call them. This time, a different dispatcher, more sympathetic. She said an officer would come to the house to take a report. Officer Patterson arrived around 11 a.m., a middle-aged man with kind eyes. I told him the whole story, showed him where the phone was, described the car I'd seen. He was patient and took notes, but I could tell he didn't think there was much to be done. Harassment calls were hard to trace, he said. Best thing was to keep the phone off the hook when I wasn't using it and to stay alert. He'd have patrol cars drive by more frequently for the next few days. That helped a little. Knowing police would be checking the neighborhood made me feel less exposed. After Officer Patterson left, I went through the house room by room in daylight, checking every window lock, every door, looking in closets and under beds. Everything was secure. No signs of anyone breaking in. My friend Carol came over that afternoon and stayed until evening. We drank coffee and played cards and pretended everything was normal. But every time the phone rang, we both flinched. Carol suggested I spend the night at her house, but I refused. This was my home. I wasn't going to be driven out of it. After Carol left around 8 p.m., I made myself dinner, barely eating. I kept the phone off the hook. I kept the bat nearby. I kept all the curtains closed. At 11 p.m., there was a knock at the back door. Not the front door, the back door that opens into the small yard. The door we barely ever used. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze on the couch. staring down the hallway toward the kitchen where the back door was. Another 3 knocks, then a voice muffled through the door. "Margaret, I know you're awake. Open the door." It was him, the man from the phone. I grabbed the bat and the phone receiver, hanging up the extension to get a dial tone. My fingers fumbled with the rotary dial, spinning 911. The operator answered immediately. "Someone's at my back door," I whispered urgently. "He's been calling me, harassing me. He's here now." She kept me on the line, dispatching officers. "Don't open the door," she said. "Stay where you are. Officers are 3 minutes away." The knocking stopped. I heard footsteps on the back patio, walking slowly around the perimeter of the house. He was testing the windows. I heard him try the window in the spare bedroom, the one that faced the side yard. The lock held. He moved to the next window. Then I heard sirens, distant but approaching fast. The footsteps broke into a run. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They searched the yard with flashlights, searched the whole neighborhood, but found no one. They did find something, though. On the back patio, pressed into the dirt of a planter box, was a single boot print, large, size 11 or 12, and on the kitchen window, handprints where he'd pressed his palms against the glass, trying to see inside. The officers dusted for prints, took photos. One of them, a younger cop named Riley, walked the perimeter with me and checked every entry point. "You did the right thing calling," he said. "This guy's escalating. Calls, then showing up, then trying your windows. Next step is breaking in." That's what scared me most. The escalation. What would he have done if I'd opened that door? If the windows hadn't been locked? The police stationed a car outside my house for the night. I finally slept a little, knowing someone was watching over me. The next day, Frank came home early. He'd driven straight through, arriving by noon. I'd never been so grateful to see him. We filed a full report. The police investigated, but they never found the man. The calls stopped after that night. I don't know if he was scared off by the police presence or if he'd moved on to some other victim. The boot print and handprints didn't match anyone in their database. We installed new locks, better ones, and a chain on every door. We got a dog, a German Shepherd named Duke, who barked at every unfamiliar sound. Frank never took another trip that left me alone for more than a day. But here's what still haunts me, 52 years later. About a month after that night, I was grocery shopping, and I saw a man in the produce section. Tall, thin, wearing work boots. He was examining tomatoes, and when he looked up, our eyes met. His face was ordinary, forgettable, except for his eyes. Cold, calculating eyes that lingered on me just a second too long. He smiled, a small, knowing smile. Then he put the tomato back and walked away. I can't be certain it was him, but something deep in my gut, some animal instinct, said yes. That's him. That's the voice on the phone. That's the man who stood at my door and wanted in. I left my cart and rushed out of the store, drove home with my heart pounding, and never saw him again. But I've thought about him thousands of times over the years, about how he knew where I lived, knew my name, knew I was alone, about how close he came to getting inside, about what he would have done if I'd been foolish enough to open that door. The second night I need to tell you about happened 13 years later, in the autumn of 1984. I was 51 years old at the time. Frank and I had moved into a 2-story Victorian-style house in upstate New York that we had purchased very cheaply because it needed extensive renovations. The previous owners had left in a hurry after a divorce, and the house had been sitting empty for 8 months. It truly was a beautiful home. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, and plenty of character. But it had its oddities as well. The stairs creaked in certain spots. The pipes groaned whenever you ran hot water. And in the hallway ceiling, there was an attic access, reached by a simple pull-down ladder, leading up into a dark, unfinished space we used for storage. We had bought the house knowing its flaws, but we were certain that after renovations, it would become a home straight out of our dreams. By then, our daughters had grown up and moved out. Linda was married and living in Boston. Beth was finishing college in Vermont. It was just Frank and me in that large old house. At the same time, it felt both too big and deeply comfortable. That October, Frank had to attend a mandatory training seminar for his job in Albany. 3 days, 2 nights. He would be staying at a hotel, and I would be home alone. At that point in my life, being alone no longer unsettled me the way it once had. I was older, more confident, more settled. We had good locks, good neighbors, and a phone we could always reach. Frank left Wednesday morning. I gave him a goodbye kiss, watched his car disappear down the street, and went on with my day. I had plenty to keep me busy. I worked part-time at the local library, volunteered at church, and was restoring an old dresser I had found at an estate sale. Wednesday evening passed without incident. I made myself dinner, watched some television, and spent an hour in the basement working on the dresser. Around 10 o'clock, I went upstairs to go to bed. Our bedroom was on the second floor at the end of a long hallway. The attic access was in that hallway, about 10 feet from our bedroom door. I remember walking past it that night and glancing up at the square panel in the ceiling. The pull cord hung down, swaying slightly in a draft I couldn't feel. I paused for just a moment, looking at it. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The cord seemed lower than usual, like someone had pulled it down and not quite pushed it back up all the way. But that was impossible. No one had been in the attic in weeks. I shrugged it off and went to bed. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at the digital clock on my nightstand, its red numbers glowing in the darkness. Something had woken me, but I didn't know what. The house was quiet. No wind, no rain, nothing unusual. Just silence. Then I heard it. A soft creak from above my head. From the attic. Old houses make noise. I knew that. Wood expands and contracts. Squirrels sometimes get into attics. It could have been anything, but this sound was different. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic. Creak, pause, creak, pause, like footsteps, like someone walking slowly across the attic floor, directly above my bedroom. I lay there frozen, staring up at the ceiling, listening. The creaking continued, slow, deliberate steps moving from one end of the attic to the other, then stopping. Silence. Then starting again, walking back the other direction. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached for the phone on my nightstand, but my hand was shaking. Who was I going to call? The police? And tell them what? That my house was making noises? The creaking stopped. I waited in the darkness, barely breathing. Minutes passed. Nothing. Maybe it had been my imagination. Maybe I'd been dreaming and the sounds had followed me into waking. I was just starting to relax when I heard something else. The attic ladder, the metal hinges creaking as the panel in the hallway ceiling began to open. I sat bolt upright in bed, my entire body flooding with adrenaline. Someone was in the attic. Someone was opening the access panel. Someone was coming down. I heard the ladder extend, heard it lock into place with a metallic click. Then I heard footsteps on the ladder rungs, slow, careful footsteps descending into my hallway. What would you have done? Hidden? Run? Or confronted whoever it was? Tell me honestly. I didn't think. Pure instinct took over. I grabbed the phone, rolled out of bed, and locked my bedroom door as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely turn the little button lock. It was flimsy, I knew. The kind of lock that keeps out children and pets, not intruders. But it was all I had. I pressed my ear against the door, listening. The footsteps had reached the bottom of the ladder. They were in my hallway now. Soft footfalls on the hardwood floor, moving slowly, carefully, coming toward my bedroom door. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, the rotary dial seeming impossibly loud in the silence. The operator answered on the second ring. "Someone's in my house," I whispered urgently. "They came down from the attic. They're in the hallway outside my bedroom right now." The operator's voice was calm, professional. "What's your address, ma'am?" I gave it to her, my voice barely audible. "Please hurry, please." "Officers are being dispatched. Stay on the line with me." "Is your bedroom door locked?" "Yes, but it's not a strong lock. It's just..." The doorknob turned. I watched in horror as the brass knob rotated slowly, testing. The door held, locked. The knob turned back, then tried again. Whoever was on the other side knew I was in here. They knew the door was locked, and they were deciding what to do about it. "They're trying to get in," I whispered into the phone. "Stay calm," the operator said. "Officers are 5 minutes away." "Is there another exit from your bedroom?" I looked around desperately. There was a window, but we were on the second floor. "There's a window, but it's a long drop." "Can you open it? Climb onto the porch roof?" I hadn't thought of that. Our bedroom window did overlook the section of wraparound porch that had a roof. I could potentially climb out onto it, but that would mean turning my back on the door, making noise with the window, exposing myself. The doorknob stopped turning. Silence. Then I heard breathing on the other side of the door. Whoever it was had their mouth near the crack, breathing loud enough for me to hear it, in and out, slow and steady. "Margaret?" A voice, low and raspy, male. "I know you're awake in there." My blood turned to ice. He knew my name? How did he know my name? "How long have I been up there, Margaret? In your attic? Days? Weeks? Listening to you walk around below me, listening to your husband leave this morning, knowing you'd be alone tonight." I felt like I was going to be sick. He'd been living in our attic, hiding up there, waiting. "Your bedroom door is so thin," he continued. "This old house, these old locks, I could break through if I wanted to. But where would you run? Down the stairs? I'm faster than you. Out the window? That's a nasty fall. You'd break something, maybe both legs. Then you'd just be lying there on the ground, waiting for me." "Police are almost there," the operator said in my ear. "Keep him talking. Don't open the door." "What do you want?" I managed to say, my voice cracking. He laughed, a soft, horrible sound. "I want you to understand something. You're not safe. Not here. Not anywhere. I've been in your house for 3 weeks. I know everything about you. I know what time you wake up, what you eat for breakfast, how you hum when you're working on that dresser in the basement. I know you're here alone, and I know your husband won't be back until Friday." 3 weeks. He'd been hiding in our attic for 3 weeks, living up there like some kind of animal. The thought made my skin crawl. How many times had I walked past that attic access, completely unaware that someone was watching me through the cracks? "I've been very patient," he said, "very quiet, waiting for the right moment. And tonight is the right moment." I heard a scraping sound. He was doing something to the door, testing the frame maybe, looking for weak points. Then, blessed sound. Sirens, distant but approaching fast. "Do you hear that, Margaret? Your friends are coming. But I'll be gone before they get here." Up the ladder, back into the attic, out through the roof vent I loosened last week. They'll search the house and find nothing. And you'll sound crazy, telling them about the man in the attic. The footsteps retreated quickly. I heard him climbing the ladder, heard him pull it up behind him, heard the attic panel close with a soft thump. Then silence. The sirens were louder now, very close. I stayed pressed against my bedroom door, phone clutched in my hand, not daring to move. 2 minutes later, there was pounding on my front door. "Police! Mrs. Walsh! It's the police!" I ran downstairs, still in my nightgown, and threw open the front door. 2 officers stood there, hands on their weapons, alert and ready. I've never been so grateful to see anyone in my life. "He was here," I gasped. "In the attic. He came down and tried to get into my bedroom. He went back up before you arrived." They didn't hesitate. Both officers drew their weapons and headed upstairs. I stayed in the living room, wrapped in a blanket one of them had grabbed from the couch, shaking like a leaf. I heard them moving through the house, heard them pull down the attic ladder, heard one of them climb up, flashlight beam sweeping through the darkness up there. "Clear!" he shouted down. "Nobody here!" They searched the entire attic, searched every room in the house, checked every closet, every possible hiding place. They found nothing, no one, but they did find evidence in the attic, in the far corner behind some old boxes we'd stored up there. They found a nest. That's what the officer called it. A nest. Someone had created a little living space. There was a sleeping bag, a pillow, a plastic bag full of food wrappers and empty water bottles, a battery-powered lantern, a bucket he had been using as a toilet, and photographs. Dozens of photographs taken through the attic floorboards, through gaps and cracks, looking down into our house. Pictures of me cooking in the kitchen, me reading in the living room, me working on the dresser in the basement. Some of the photos had dates written on the back. The oldest was from 3 weeks ago, just like he'd said. There was also a small notebook. Inside were handwritten notes, my daily schedule, what time I woke up, what time Frank left for work, what time I usually went to bed, lists of when I was alone in the house. It was all documented, studied, planned. The officer who found it had to step outside for a moment. Even he looked shaken. "There's a roof vent," the other officer said, pointing to the far end of the attic. "The screen's been removed. Someone could squeeze through there, climb down the trellis on the side of the house. That's probably how he got in and out." They dusted for fingerprints, collected everything as evidence, called for backup and more units to search the neighborhood. But whoever he was gone, vanished into the night. Frank came home immediately when I called him. He drove through the night, arrived by dawn. We didn't sleep. We couldn't. We sat in the living room with 2 police officers, going over everything again and again. The fingerprints came back a few days later. They matched a man named David Carver, a 42-year-old with a criminal record, breaking and entering, burglary, stalking. He'd been released from prison 7 months earlier after serving 4 years. Police searched for him, put out an alert, but he'd disappeared. They checked his last known address, talked to his parole officer, interviewed his family. No one knew where he was. He'd violated parole and gone underground. We moved out of that house 2 weeks later, couldn't stay there. Every time I looked at that attic access, I felt sick, knowing he'd been up there, watching us, listening to us, waiting. We lost money on the sale, selling it quickly to the first buyer who made an offer. I didn't care. I couldn't spend another night in that house. We moved to a small ranch house, single story, no attic, no crawl space, no hidden areas. Frank installed an alarm system that covered every window and door. We got motion sensor lights for every side of the house. We changed all our routines, all our patterns. But here's what still haunts me. 6 months after we moved, I was at a shopping mall in a town 20 miles away. I was browsing in a bookstore, and I felt someone watching me. You know that feeling, that prickling on the back of your neck that tells you you're being observed. I turned around, and there he was, standing in the next aisle, partially hidden by a shelf, staring at me. Thin face, hollow cheeks, dark eyes that I recognized from the mugshot the police had shown me. David Carver. Our eyes met for just a second. He didn't smile, didn't move, just stared. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of shoppers. I reported it immediately. Police came to the mall, searched for him, but he was gone. They increased patrols around our new house for a few weeks, but they never found him. That was 39 years ago. I'm 91 now. David Carver would be 81 if he's even still alive. But sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I still think about him, about how he watched me for 3 weeks without me knowing, about how close he came to breaking through that bedroom door, about how he looked at me in that bookstore with that same calculating expression. And I think about all the other people out there who might have someone living in their walls, their attics, their crawl spaces, watching, waiting, studying their patterns, planning. Because the scariest thing I learned that night is this: the monster isn't always outside trying to get in. Sometimes the monster is already inside, already watching, already waiting for the perfect moment. The third and final night I need to tell you about happened much more recently, in 2008. I was 75 years old, and Frank had passed away 2 years earlier from heart failure. Oh, my dear Frank, his absence had wounded me deeply. Losing the person you share your life with is harder than you ever imagine. I was living alone in a modest apartment within a quiet retirement community in Arizona. The place was perfect for me. Single story, a small garden, friendly neighbors, and a security program that made everyone feel safe. My apartment was at the end of the row, which meant I shared a wall with only one neighbor, and I liked that. To my right lived the Mitchells, a pleasant couple in their 60s. To my left was open space, just desert landscaping and a walking path. Across the small street lived various other retirees, all quiet, all friendly, the kind of people who wave when you check the mail. Once you're over 70, Your tolerance for noise wears thin. So having neighbors like the Mitchells suited me just fine. In late October, new neighbors moved in directly across from me, a man living alone. One Saturday morning, I watched the moving truck arrive and saw him directing the movers, carrying boxes himself, despite looking to be in his 50s. He was of average height, average build, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore khaki pants and a plain blue shirt. Completely ordinary. I did what neighbors do. I baked a small batch of cookies and walked them over that afternoon to introduce myself. He answered the door with a pleasant smile. "Hello," I said. "I'm Margaret from across the way. Just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." "How kind," he said, taking the plate. "I'm Robert Finch. Thank you so much for these." We chatted for a few minutes. He told me he was retired from banking, had moved from Nevada to be closer to his daughter who lived in Phoenix. He seemed perfectly nice, perfectly normal. We said our goodbyes, and I went home thinking how nice it was to have a new neighbor. The first strange thing happened 3 days later. I was in my living room reading, and I happened to glance out the window. Robert was standing in his front window, looking directly at my house. Not just glancing, but standing there, hands in his pockets, staring. When he saw me notice him, he didn't wave or look away. He just kept staring for another few seconds, then slowly backed away from the window. It made me uncomfortable, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he hadn't been looking at my house specifically. Maybe he was just looking out his window, thinking about something, spacing out the way people do. But it happened again the next day, and the day after that. Every time I looked out my front window, there he was, standing in his window, watching my house. Sometimes for just a minute or two, sometimes for much longer. I started keeping my curtains closed during the day, which I'd never done before. Then I started noticing other things. When I'd go to my mailbox in the afternoon, he'd come out to check his mail at the exact same time, even though the mail had already been delivered hours earlier. When I'd take out my trash in the evening, he'd appear in his driveway, pretending to inspect his car or sweep his porch, but really just watching me. When I'd go for my daily walk around the community paths, I'd see him on his porch as I passed. Every single time, like he was waiting for me. He'd smile and wave, and I'd smile and wave back. But it felt wrong, too coincidental, too consistent. I mentioned it to Mrs. Mitchell one afternoon when we were both watering our small gardens. "Have you noticed anything odd about the new neighbor?" I asked carefully. She lowered her voice. "Robert? Oh yes, he gives me the creeps, to be honest. Tom says I'm being ridiculous, but there's something off about him. He's always watching, always outside when you're outside." So it wasn't just me. That made me feel both validated and more frightened. A week later, I woke up at 3 a.m. needing to use the bathroom. As I walked past my living room on the way back to bed, something made me glance out the front window. I don't know why. Maybe some instinct, some animal sense that I was being observed. Robert was standing in his front yard, in the middle of the night, in the darkness, facing my house, just standing there, perfectly still, looking at my window. My heart nearly stopped. I ducked away from the window, pressing myself against the wall. What was he doing? Why was he standing in his yard at 3 a.m. watching my house? I peeked carefully around the curtain edge. He was still there, hadn't moved. He was wearing dark clothes and stood in the shadow of a palm tree, making him almost invisible. If I hadn't happened to look out at just the right angle, I never would have seen him. I watched for 5 full minutes. He never moved, never looked away. Just stood there, staring at my dark windows like a statue. Finally, he turned and went back inside his house. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Would you have called the police? Or waited to see if it happened again? Tell me what you would have done. The next morning, exhausted and frightened, I called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation, the constant watching, the coincidental encounters, and now standing in his yard in the middle of the night, staring at my house. The dispatcher was sympathetic, but cautious. Has he threatened you? Tried to contact you? Come onto your property? No, but unfortunately, there's not much we can do if he's just standing in his own yard. That's not illegal. But we can send an officer to talk to him if you'd like. Let him know he's making you uncomfortable. I agreed. An officer came by that afternoon, went across the street, and spoke with Robert for about 10 minutes. I watched from my window as Robert smiled and nodded, looking completely reasonable and friendly. When the officer came to my door afterward, he seemed skeptical. Mr. Finch says he's not watching you specifically. He says he enjoys looking at the desert landscaping and happened to be awake that night because of insomnia. He apologized if he made you uncomfortable and promised to be more mindful. He was staring at my house, I insisted, directly at my windows. I understand, ma'am. I've noted everything in a report. If he bothers you again, call us immediately. But right now, he hasn't broken any laws. I felt dismissed, patronized, like I was just a paranoid old woman imagining things. But I wasn't imagining things. Because that night, it got worse. I was in bed, lights off, trying to sleep. Around midnight, I heard a sound from my back patio, a soft scraping noise, like something being dragged across concrete. My condo had a small enclosed patio with a 6-foot privacy fence. The only entrance was through a gate on the side, or through the sliding glass door from my living room. I got up quietly and crept to the living room. The patio was visible through the glass door, lit only by a small solar light I kept out there. I could see the outline of my patio furniture, my potted plants. Everything looked normal. Then I saw movement near the gate, a shadow shifting. Someone was in my patio. My hands shaking, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone was in my backyard. She told me to stay inside, lock all doors, and wait. Officers were on the way. I watched through the glass as the shadow moved along the fence line, stopping at each gap in the slats, looking through, looking into my house. I could see the pale blur of a face pressing close to the gaps, trying to see inside. It was Robert. I knew it was him, even in the darkness. I recognized his build, his height, the way he moved. He spent at least 5 minutes circling my patio, peering through every crack and gap in the fence, trying to see into my windows. Then he tried the sliding glass door. The handle rattled as he tested it. Locked. He tried again, putting more pressure on it. The door held. Then he pulled something from his pocket. In the dim light, I saw a glint of metal, a tool of some kind. He was going to try to break in. That's when the police sirens announced their arrival. Robert moved fast. He slipped out the side gate and was gone before the officers could see him. 2 patrol cars arrived. I told them everything, showed them where he'd been in my patio. They found the gate unlocked. He'd opened it somehow. They found scuff marks on the concrete where he'd crouched by the sliding door. And they found scratches on the door frame where he'd tried to jimmy the lock. This time, they took it seriously. They went to Robert's house and knocked. No answer. They knocked again, louder. Still nothing. They checked the windows. The house was dark. His car was gone. They put out a call for his vehicle, filed a report for attempted breaking and entering, left me their cards, and told me to call immediately if he returned. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with every light on, phone in hand, jumping at every sound. The Mitchells came over in the morning when they heard what happened. Tom stayed with me while his wife made coffee, both of them assuring me I was safe now, that the police would find Robert and arrest him. But they didn't find him. His car was spotted the next day, abandoned at a rest stop 40 miles away. Police searched his condo with a warrant. What they found made my blood run cold. The walls were covered with photographs, not just of me, but of multiple women, elderly women, living alone, all in different locations. Phoenix, Tucson, Las Vegas, Albuquerque. Dozens of women. Some of the photos showed the women in their homes, taken through windows. Some showed them at mailboxes, in parking lots, at stores. All surveillance photos, all taken without knowledge. There were files on each woman, names, addresses, daily schedules, notes about security systems, notes about whether they had family nearby. It was a hunting ground. He'd been targeting vulnerable elderly women for years. They found newspaper clippings too, articles about missing elderly women, about women found dead in their homes. The police wouldn't tell me all the details, but they said Robert Finch wasn't his real name. His real name was Robert Payne, and he was wanted in 3 states for fraud, burglary, and suspected involvement in at least 2 deaths. I was one of dozens of potential victims, and I'd almost become an actual victim. The FBI joined the investigation. My photo was added to the evidence. They told me I was lucky. If I hadn't woken up that night, if I hadn't called 911 when I did, he would have gotten into my house. And based on the pattern they'd established, I probably wouldn't have survived. They never caught him. He vanished completely, changed identities again, probably, moved to a different state, started over with new targets. I moved out of that condo within a month, couldn't stay there. The community that had felt so safe now felt like a hunting ground. I moved in with my daughter Linda in Boston for 6 months, then found a new place in a high-security building with cameras and doormen and neighbors on all sides. But here's what I think about. 17 years later, how many other Robert Finches are out there? How many predators choose retirement communities specifically because they're full of elderly people living alone? People who are trusting, who bake cookies for new neighbors, who don't want to seem paranoid or difficult. I think about the other women in those photographs on his wall. Did he visit them too? Did some of them not wake up in time? Did some of them ignore the warning signs, not want to bother the police, not want to be a burden? I think about how ordinary he looked, how friendly, how I would have passed him on the street and never looked twice. That's what makes predators so dangerous. They don't look like monsters. They look like neighbors. And I think about that night when I happened to wake up at 3 a.m., happened to look out my window, happened to see him standing in his yard watching my house. What if I hadn't woken up? What if I'd taken a sleeping pill that night, like I sometimes did? I would have slept through everything. I would never have known he was testing my patio gate, studying my locks, planning his entry. Sometimes I wonder if Frank was watching over me that night, if something made me wake up at exactly the right moment. I like to think so. I like to think he was there, whispering in my ear to wake up, to look outside, to see the danger. These 3 nights, the phone calls, the attic, the neighbor, taught me that home isn't always the sanctuary we want it to be, that walls and locks and quiet streets don't guarantee safety, that monsters don't announce themselves. They watch first, they study, they wait for you to be alone, to be vulnerable, to let your guard down. If these stories have stayed with you, if they've made you think twice about the sounds in your house or the new neighbor across the street, please leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe. I'm 91 years old now. I've survived 3 different predators across 3 different decades. I've learned to trust my instincts, to not worry about seeming paranoid, to call for help when something feels wrong. And I want you to learn from my experiences. If someone is watching you, report it. If someone makes you uncomfortable, trust that feeling. If you're home alone and something doesn't seem right, don't investigate. Call the police. Because the worst thing you can do is nothing. The worst thing you can do is convince yourself you're overreacting, that you're being silly, that it's probably nothing. Sometimes it is nothing, but sometimes it's everything. Sometimes it's the difference between surviving and becoming another photograph on a predator's wall. Stay safe, my dears. Lock your doors, close your curtains, trust your instincts, and never, ever assume that you're safe just because you're home.